in the last stream, we were working on massively upgrading our power generation by setting up our first big reactor down here at the very bottom of our base, currently capable of producing almost 10,000 redstone flux per tick, a massive upgrade over the 240 redstone flux per tick that we were previously generating via to create alternators. Since the end of the last episode, I have gone ahead and kind of disconnected this whole side of the base from that first alternator that we made many episodes ago, and I have replaced all of the LV connectors with these flux points, so now all of our immersive engineering machines are now connected directly up to the reactor down at the bottom of the base, including our newest immersive engineering machine, the arc furnace, which is hopefully going to be used today to get us some osmium. So osmium is kind of our next big task, but osmium in this pack is pretty hard to get because we have to complete basically all of these quests here to get to osmium. In fact, if we look at the recipe, there's a chance we might even need to make a bigger reactor because the amount of power needed to make the first osmium ingot, despite the fact that it only has 512 EMC, is quite high. Because in this pack, we make 3 osmium by placing 1 stellarium dust, we'll bookmark that, into the arc furnace. 1 stellarium dust is made by pulverizing 1 stellarium ingot. 1 stellarium ingot is made using the energizing orb from power. We'll get to this in a second. And in here, we need to combine a signalum ingot, a melodium ingot, a prismalium ingot, an enderium ingot, a Gaia spirit ingot, and a charged snowball, along with 500 million redstone flux. 500 million redstone flux to make 16 stellarium ingots. Most of these do have an EMC value, and so once we've made one of them, they're easy enough to get. The only thing that doesn't have an EMC value here is the melodium ingot. This is made on the runic altar using a bunch of stuff we've made already, things like blaze powder, pixie dust, lumium we've not made yet, but we will make today as part of the quests. We've made elementium, we've got amethyst shards. Amethyst dust is just an amethyst shard that's crushed. The tricky bit here is the charged amethyst, which is made again in the energizing orb with 100 million redstone flux and 1 amethyst shard. So this is really why we needed to get that massive power upgrade in the last episode, because we need hundreds of millions of redstone flux today to be able to craft some of these recipes, and we need to work our way through this quest line. So some of these initial quests are not too bad. Things like signalum, enderium, and prismalium I think are all fairly straightforward. These are all just made inside of the induction smelter, and they're all used in the making of the stellarium here, so I think we can just check right here. The signalum, for example, is made using cinnabar, constantan, and rose gold, most of which we should be able to get. But before we get started with any of that, there are a few small tweaks that I would like to make to our current setup just to make life a little bit easier. The first thing that I'd like to do is I would like to look at getting the Swiftwolf Rendingale. This right here is a ring from Project E that gives us the ability to fly. It should give us creative flight. To make it, it is going to be a little expensive. It costs 500,000 EMC, and we only have 800,000 EMC in the top left there. But to make it, we need 4 feathers, 1 iron band, and then 4 dark matter. The dark matter we have made before, and we can take 4 of them out of here. That's the most expensive part of the setup. On top of that, the iron band, also pretty straightforward. It's 8 iron and then 1 bucket of lava. The bucket of lava we don't have, but we should be able to get fairly easily. And then the only thing we don't actually have here is the 4 feathers, but thankfully we can turn string into feathers using our alchemy catalyst. Unfortunately, we did move the mana pool that was on top of the alchemy catalyst at the end of the last stream. Thankfully though, we can once again put one of these diluted mana pools down, grab a mana spreader, because again, you do have to have a little bit of mana inside of the mana pool in order to use a Black Lotus. Once there's a tiny bit in there, we can throw the Black Lotus in, pick up the mana spreader, and we should be good to make really as many feathers as we like. Not that we needed more than 1, because of course they do have an EMC value. And so real quick, let me go and grab my lava tank. Let's place that down on the ground, making sure that we're not in bucket mode. We can then take the bucket of lava out, and that should be everything for the iron band, which I guess I might as well actually teach to my transmutation tablet, just on the off chance that we do need it again in the future. We can then go ahead and craft all of that together to get the Swiftwolf's Rendingale. And the way that this works, you'll notice by default I can't fly. This does require that you carry around some kind of fuel in your inventory. And by fuel, it's usually like EMCable items, things like Aeternalis fuel, the fuels from Project E. Now, there is a quest line actually down here for some of the stuff from Project E, and these fuels along the bottom are kind of the fuels I'm talking about. We have alchemical coal, Mobius fuel, Eternalis fuel, etc. You can also use, I think, glowstone, redstone, and maybe coal. If I put, for example, some glowstone in my inventory, we should be able to fly. Look at that. And slowly but surely, over time, the Swiftwolf Rendingale here is going to take that EMC and use it. You'll see at the bottom there, it says stored EMC, and the number is slowly ticking down, and that's because it's using the fuel from that glowstone, and once that hits 0, it will then eat another piece of glowstone to continue to allow you to fly. And so we just have to make sure that we have some kind of fuel in our inventory. If you do run out of fuel, then it will fail. One useful fuel is the Eternalis fuel here, just because it has just such a high EMC value, but the fact that it does have such a high EMC value is also what makes it kind of expensive to keep around. But if we keep a couple of those, maybe 10 on us, we should be able to use this creative flight basically indefinitely. And there are better ways in the future that we can use to hold EMC on us, but given that we don't have that much EMC available right now, I don't know if that's really worth investing in. Speaking of EMC though, the second thing that I do want to work on is getting ourselves one of these guys, the Transmutation interface. This is super useful, especially when connected up to our simple storage network, because it's going to give our simple storage network access to our transmutation table, basically. It's going to make it accessible. Now, to do that, all we have to do is use the deployer here to deploy a machine casing onto a transmutation table. Actually, super easy stuff. If we do this and we do this, that's going to get us the transmutation interface. And from there, if we get another one of the link cables, these guys right here, we should then be able to place this down somewhere connected to our system. For now, let's put it here. And then if we place down the transmutation interface next to that, like so, and we set this to a super low priority, let's say -15. So we want things going here first, because now if we open up our wireless crafting grid, you'll see that we have a ton more items. Now, we don't actually have all these items. This is just showing us all of the items we could make with all of the EMC that we have. So it looks like we have 6,000 sugarcane, but if I take some sugarcane out, up in the top left here, you'll see that we're at 205,000 EMC. If I take a stack out, you'll see that it takes that away from me on the EMC number there. And if I put it back in, it puts it back in as well. And so now, going forward, whenever we put something into the system that has an EMC value, like the Eternalis fuel here, it should put it directly into the transmutation interface. And even if it's something that we've not taught yet, for example, this Swiftwolf's Rendingale, I could put that in, and now that should just be taught to the system, depending on the item. It looks like some items, like my Swiftwolf there, did not go into that slot. Maybe that's because it's not taught. I'm actually not too sure, but we'll keep a hold of that. You can also put this into one of your bauble slots here as well, which just frees up the inventory space. Let me make sure I do keep that Eternalis fuel there. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, my melon slices here haven't been taught. If I put those in, they did go into the transmutation interface. And so now if I look in here, before they weren't taught, but now they have been taught. And so slowly but surely, we shouldn't have to spend, hopefully, as much time teaching things manually to the system, because over time things should just kind of automatically get taught as we put them back into here, which is perfect. And so now that that's taken care of, we can now pivot over back to seeing if we can't get our first osmium ingot. So we'll start here with the signalum, like we said before. The signalum was cinnabar, which we actually don't have, at least not just yet, along with Constantan and Rose Gold. So Constantan we do have, I'll take one of those. Rose Gold we should have, it's just not been taught. Again, if I put one back in, that should teach it straight away. So now if we look at the Rose Gold, you'll see it has a little tick next to it there, so that is perfect. And then as for cinnabar, this can be made by, I assume, pulverizing something as a byproduct. That appears to be the case, but it looks like we need some kind of ore. We don't have ores there, so it's possible there might be an alternative way to make this. There is. We can turn 48 redstone into 6 cinnabar using our pressure chamber. There is a very thin line there where it will work, but that should be fine. Let's get 48 redstone. Let's put all of that into here. I'm going to give that a quick tap because it's going to take a while to go in otherwise. And then we are going to have to get a lot more pressure in here, because right now our pressure is super low after we did all the plastic making in a previous episode. So we'll speed that up quite a bit. We're quite a ways away from 5 bar there. And as soon as it hits the 5 bar, we should hopefully manage to transfer that into the cinnabar that we want. Okay, so we're getting very close here. I'm going to take the fuel out because I didn't want it to explode. That is unfortunate. We're at 4.7 bars. Annoyingly, I don't think that I taught my system the air compressor, despite the fact that it does have an EMC value. Thankfully, that is fine. Let's do that to teach our system how to make furnaces. Let's also do this to teach it how to make the air compressors. And so now it should be a case of just taking that out and putting it back down. I might have gone a little too far there on the pressure. just a little bit too far. I was really hoping that would get us there, though. Let me do this again. We're not going to go quite as hard. And there is potentially a problem here because our pressure tube does release pressure when we get to 4.9 bar. And it looks like this needs kind of specifically 4.9 bar in order to work. And so I don't know if the safety valve here is going to prevent us from actually being able to get to the required pressure. I've never seen a recipe with such a thin requirement there, but I'm hopeful that it will work despite the fact that we have the safety valve on there. All right, 4.9. We're there. This is creeping up to 4.9 as well. Oh, it is over. This has got to 4.9. But it looks like it's not quite getting there. It might be like 4.95 or something. It might be like bang on the amount needed. Yeah, 4.95. That's such a high threshold. Okay, so people are saying that we can disconnect this with a wrench. I don't know if any wrench works. Any wrench will work. That's really tricky to balance, though. Getting up to... You'll see we're actually losing pressure here, even with our speed upgrade. So we do have to go to 8x to gain pressure. That's because we have stuff on here. But I think things are going to explode. I believe we can make, like, pressure upgrades. I'm going to take the fuel out. There we go. Okay, it did work. This might... Oh, no, we're good. We're good. Okay, I thought something was going to explode. But never mind, we got the Cinnabar. Okay, perfect. You just have to temporarily take off the safety tube module to make that work. I'm going to replace that back down right about here. Fantastic. And so now, down here, chat, over in our induction smelter, we should be able to combine up the Constantan, the Rose Gold, and our newly acquired Cinnabar, which we now have a ton of in here to get our first Signalum. After the Signalum, we then have Enderium here. Enderium, I assume, is going to require some kind of Ender Pearl. It does not. We need Signalum along with Enderpearl Dust and Obsidian. So I guess that's kind of correct. I think Enderpearl Dust, if I'm not mistaken, is just made by pulverizing an Enderpearl. It is indeed fantastic. So we'll take that. And of course now, just adding it to our system should make it EMCable. It does indeed. Good stuff. And then whilst we wait for that, we might as well grab one more Signalum along with one Obsidian. And of course that one Enderpearl Dust, which I will temporarily put in here. So we have a ton of it ready for the future. And then boom, boom, boom. That's going to get us our Enderium. Down here, the Prismalium. How in the world do we make this? This is gold, prismarine, and Invar. So Invar, surprisingly, has not been EMC'd. That's fine. Now it has. The prismarine we do have. Again, not EMC'd, but now should be. So we put it back in. It is indeed fantastic. And then what was the final piece of the puzzle there? Was it glowstone? I forget. I can't look through there every time. Final piece of the puzzle there? Gold dust is the answer. And again, I think gold dust can be acquired by simply throwing gold into the pulverizer. Again, we can make that just a little bit faster, especially now that we have the power to handle it. And we've got these flux points on the back of all of these. Fantastic. Let's do you, and you. Cool. And again, we'll give that a quick tap to make it just that little bit quicker. And that is basically those two taken care of. Good. So now that we have the Signalum, we have to kind of pivot up into the power mod. So the first item here that we need to make is the dielectric paste, which you guessed it, thankfully does have an EMC value. So we do only have to make it once. In this pack, the recipe has been tweaked to require Electrum blend, Signalum blend, and porcelain clay. The porcelain clay we have made before, it's just not been EMC'd. That's fine. It has now. We'll take that. The Signalum and Electrum blend are just pulverized Signalum and pulverized Electrum. Electrum, we actually do have. I didn't think we were going to have any. That's just the alloy between gold and silver. So we could have made more, I guess, if we had needed to. But then back over here, we can do a quick one of these. And that's going to get us the Electrum and Signalum blend, which of course, for now, we will teach. And then if we just type in blend, we can grab both of those back out. 1 and 2. And of course, back in here, boom, boom, and boom. That should get us our first dielectric paste, which does have an EMC value. It's quite expensive, 2,400. So we might not be able to make a ton of it, only 157, but of course we do still have more EMC kind of being generated down here. We can always take out more lapis and kind of throw that into the system to give us a big boost. And of course that lapis is still available now in the system thanks to that transmutation interface. So now that we have dielectric paste, the first thing that we need to make is the energizing orb and associated energizing rods. The way this works is that the energizing orb is where the craft is done, and the energizing rods are used to transfer power into the energizing orb. Unlike a lot of other machines, you can't just put a flux point or really any power transfer device on the energizing orb. You have to power it through these energizing rods. The energizing rods, again, thankfully do have an EMC value, and they're thankfully not too difficult to make either. This requires a block of quartz, which we should be able to do. We've got some nether quartz. Let me quickly take that out and put it back in so we can EMC it, and we'll also do this so we can EMC the block version of it. Then, in order to make the orb here and the rods, we need to get dielectric casing, dielectric rods, and then some capacitors. So the dielectric casing is made from iron and then both horizontal and vertical dielectric rods. These are why we needed the dielectric paste. We also do need some iron bars. That's fine. We could do this, and we now have iron bars ready to go, 14,000 of them, which is absolute madness. Let's do something like this. And you can also craft the horizontal dielectric rods into vertical dielectric rods very easily, and vice versa as well. And from there, we can do this. Of course, crafting one gets us the EMC'd item, which is perfect. And then for the capacitor, these tiny capacitors are made by downcrafting a basic capacitor, which we can make with dielectric paste, iron, redstone, and boom. Nice. And this is all made so much easier by the fact that we now have access to that transmutation interface. It means that whenever we craft one thing, like the energizing rod, we can then just pull out as many of them as we want without having to go through even the smallest step of just adding it to our transmutation table, because it is just added automatically, which is fantastic. So I think for now, I'm going to put this energizing orb down here somewhere by our reactor. Actually, I guess it doesn't matter if we put it by the reactor. We can use our power points to put them elsewhere. And so, in fact, I'll probably put it up here somewhere. In fact, we can probably put it right about here. Let me grab one energizing orb. We'll put that down, let's say, right about there. And then we need to put the energizing rods down around it. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that you can put the energizing rods directly onto flux points, but I could be wrong on that. Let me give that a try. If I do this, set it to my network, and then place this on top like that, that does work. Look at that, it's getting power. Good. So this will work, albeit very, very, very slowly. And the reason for that is that there are different tiers of energizing rod. You'll see we have the starter tier here, and it goes all the way up: basic, hardened, blazing, nilotic, spirited, and nitro. And the idea here is that each one has a different maximum IO, that being the in and out rate. So this one can send and receive 100 redstone flux per tick, then it goes up to 400, 1000, 4000, 10,000, 40,000, and finally 200,000 redstone flux per tick. And so using this current energizing rod, if we wanted to craft just the Melodium here, and by that I mean the charged amethyst. The charged amethyst requires 100 million redstone flux. To do that, at just 100 redstone flux per tick, you can take 100 million, divide it by 100, that gives you a million ticks. There are 20 ticks per second in Minecraft, so you divide a million by 20, it's going to take 50,000 seconds. You divide that by 60, you get 833 minutes. You divide that by 60, you get just shy of 14 hours. And so if we were to just use this one energizing rod, it would take 14 hours to complete the craft. So we ideally here need to move up to some of the higher tier rods. Thankfully, the next tier here, not very difficult. It is made with just a block of quartz, the basic non-tiny capacitors, another dielectric casing, and the previous rod. Easy enough. Moving up after that to the next tier is where it gets a little tricky though, because here we have to actually start investing in resources that we don't yet have access to. Already though, we've divided the amount of time taken by 4. So instead of taking 14 hours, if we just used one of these rods, it would take about 3.5 hours. And again, you can put multiple of these down. So I could just put down like 10 of these basic energizing rods. And in fact, that might not be a terrible solution to getting this done, because that would work and could be done in, half an hour if we made a bunch of them. But it's really not that difficult to move up to the higher tiers. I don't know what the actual range is on the orb, by the way, but you can put these down a fair distance out. I think it might be like 3 or 4 blocks out in each direction. They do need to be somewhat close, but you can put as many of them as you want down, and having more of them down, of course, increases the amount of redstone flux that you can transfer into and out of the energizing orb. But to get to hardened here, we need hardened capacitors. Everything else we should have. The hardened capacitors here are made using dielectric paste, large capacitors, which are 2 regular capacitors. We'll teach that. And then we also need some of this energized steel. Energized steel is made with gold and iron inside of the energizing orb. So if we take 1 gold and 1 iron, we can put both of those in here, boom and boom. And then if we put down one of our energizing rods, this should work. The basic one is the better one. Let's do this. We should see a laser going from one to the other. It does. And boom, it's done. One thing to bear in mind, you cannot bulk craft in the energizing orb. if you put in more items than is necessary, for example, let's say I just tried to put 2 of each in. If I put 2 iron and 2 gold in, the recipe will not work. You have to put the precise number of items required to do the craft. And so when you're trying to automate with this, that does become a little tricky, but just something to bear in mind. If you're trying to do this, that's why it doesn't work. You have to put in the exact right number of items, and also don't shift right click because that also doesn't work well. Anyway, now that we have the energized steel, this does thankfully have an EMC value, and so we can very quickly make these hardened capacitors and get a hardened energizing rod. This has an EMC value as well, so we'll put that back in, and it also is now capable of doing 1000 redstone flux per tick, and so it is now 10 times faster than that 14 hours that we saw initially, or effectively it's going to be like 1.4 hours instead of 14 hours, which is good. Still probably too long, but of course we could put multiple of these down. But again, we can move on to the next tier. The blazing here is the same recipe, but now we need blazing capacitors. These need blazing crystals. These are made using either blaze rods or blaze powder, and as luck would have it, we have got a ton of blaze powder. So if we take one of our energizing rods, the unfortunate thing here is that if your energizing rod has power in it, like ours do here, any item that has like any kind of NBT data won't get put into the transmutation interface. So these two are just going to get put into our chests. We can, if we want, put them in the burn slot here manually, and that will delete the power that's in them and put them into the EMC network. But just bear that in mind if you're trying to put something into here that has any kind of like power in it or fluid in it or items in it, that won't happen, which is kind of good for us because it means if we accidentally put like a backpack in the system, it's not going to delete everything in our backpack. It's just going to put it in the system for us. So it's beneficial, but just something to bear in mind because otherwise these rods could start to clog up the system quite aggressively. But for us, we can just take the hardened energizing rod, throw that down like so, and then throw in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blaze powder. Wait, is it 4 blaze powder? 4 blaze powder, and that should somewhat quickly get us our first blazing crystal, which I'm fairly certain, once again, should have an EMC value. It does indeed. You'll love to see it. That's going to allow us to make blazing capacitors, which also have an EMC value, and then from there we can make ourselves the blazing energizing rod, which also has an EMC value and can transfer 4,000 redstone flux per tick. So it's 4 times faster than this was, and so I think now we're actually at a point where this should be fine. And of course, we're actually at a point now where we're kind of running up on the limit of how much power we're generating using our reactor. If I put 3 of these down, 2 of these is 8,000 RF per tick, 3 of these is 12,000 RF per tick, which is already more than we're actually making down with our big reactor. And so this right now is kind of more than we can actually provide. So let's take a look then. If we wanted to make this charged amethyst, it was just 1 amethyst shard, which we can throw down in here, and that should start to work. We do have power backed up. We've got about 10 million, I think, backed up inside the reactor. I do think that currently the reactor is offline, and so I don't think this will be producing any power. It's not. You'll see the power there is getting taken away, but if we go ahead and turn that on, that is still losing power, of course, because we're using it faster than it's coming in. Thankfully, that's not too big of an issue, because the progress here doesn't reset when you lose power. It will just wait, and then when you have enough power, it will put more power into it, and it will just keep going. But there is a possibility, even a probability here, that we should probably look at maybe making a bigger reactor to allow us to run this without having to wait so long. But for now, we'll leave that going because we only need 1, really, I think. Once we have 1, we do get quite a few of these molybdenum ingots, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check that. We get 2 molybdenum ingots, and we only need 1 molybdenum ingot to make the 1 stellarium ingot. So while we wait for that to do its thing, we can look at getting the other items required for the stellarium ingot. One of those items is lumium. The lumium is a very similar recipe to the signalum and enderium. This is, once again, made over in the induction smelter. It needs enderium, a lightning charge, and a glowstone. So the glowstone and the enderium we already have, of course. We can take 1 of each of those. The only thing we don't have here is the lightning charge. The lightning charge is once again made in the pressure chamber here with 3 earth charges. The earth charges are made using some Bazal's powder, some coal, and some gunpowder. Bazal's powder is made by pulverizing Bazal shards, which are made using the blaze rod in a mana pool with a blaze mesh. Interesting. Okay, that's actually fine. Let's take a blaze rod. The blaze mesh is here. Perfect. We can then pulverize this in here. I was about to head downstairs for the old pulverizer, but it's no longer down there. Let's do this. And once we have you, that should be everything for the earth charge, and then we just need to put the earth charges into our pressure chamber and then make sure that we have enough pressure. You'll see our pressure is back down at 0. We should probably disconnect this vortex tube, because I think the vortex tube is kind of actively wasting our pressure, making this hot and making this cold when we don't currently need it to be doing that. And so let me throw the fuel back in here. Let's make that a fair bit faster. I think 16x is fine. I think 32x might even be fine. Honestly, it's going to wear off. We can always take the fuel out. We just gotta make sure we take the fuel out early enough so it doesn't blow up. But that should be fine. This area is much safer to work in. Like, the area is bigger. We don't have to be quite so precise. I'm gonna take the fuel out there. I'm gonna put one back in. Don't blow up, don't blow up. It didn't blow up. Perfect. I think that is fine. Nice. Okay, cool. Let me drop that in here. This doesn't have any MC value, which is unfortunate. However, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the Lumium does have an EMC value. It doesn't. That is unfortunate. We probably should have taught the earth charges, actually. Let me put that back in there so that is ready to go for the future. And also maybe the Basal's powder as well should have been taught. But to be fair, it wasn't too difficult to make. That's fine. The Lumium we now have. So what else do I need here? In fact, I think we can start looking at what we need for the Melodium itself. We've got the Signalum, we've got the Prismalium, we've got the Enderium. We do need a Gaia Spirit Ingot. That's actually super easy for us to do. We've got Terra Steel and Gaia taught already, so we can just teach that, and that's also good to go. We can unbookmark that now. That's all done. And then we do need a charged Snowball. That needs to be done over in our Energizing Orb, which is just over halfway there, so we'll hold off on that one for a second. As for the actual Melodium itself, this, of course, is going to be made on a Runic Altar, and it requires Blaze Powder, which we have, Pixie Dust, which we have, Lumium, which we have, Elementium, which we actually don't have. We might have some. No, we don't. That's fine. But we can get, of course, by throwing 2 Mana Steel directly through our portal, and it does, thankfully, have an EMC value. Cool. So that's checked off the list as well. And then, finally, we need Amethyst and Amethyst Dust. So Amethyst we have. The Amethyst Dust, it looked like we couldn't pulverize that. Never mind, you totally can. It looked for a second like we had to use the crushing wheel downstairs, but thankfully, it looks like the pulverizer here will do the trick. Again, no EMC on this, which is unfortunate, but that's fine. We only need 1 to get 2 Melodium, and we only need 1 Melodium to get 16 Stellarium, which is more than enough. The Osmium that we're making does have an EMC after the fact, so that is completely fine. And yeah, this is mostly good. Let me get this Runic Altar up and running. This is made with a Mana Diamond and some Living Rock. We actually don't have a Mana Diamond. That is surprising, especially given that they do have an EMC value. So let me quickly do one of these, if we find somewhere that has mana. Boom. And then Living Rock, also no EMC, unfortunately. So we are going to have to get the old stone down around the Pure Daisy over here. Thankfully, this is, of course, acceleratable, and already doesn't take that long, to be fair, to produce the Living Rock. Fantastic. And that should be everything for the Runic Altar. Nice. Now, this, of course, is also going to require mana. And so what I will do, I'm going to place that down. I'm going to place it down here for now, because I'll probably end up using mana from some of these pools to actually power it. We are probably also going to want to put some more Blacker Lotuses into these pools as well to get enough mana for that. And so with that in mind, it's probably worth getting some more Hop Graphite Dust cooking up over here. If we do something like that, that's going to get us more Hop Graphite Dust, which of course gets us more Blacker Lotuses. And whilst we wait for all of that, we can actually start putting stuff onto this Runic Altar. So let's get 1 Blaze Powder. We'll throw that on, just right click, by the way, along with 1 Amethyst Dust. We'll throw that on. 1 Lumium. We will throw that on. We also, in fact, we can bookmark this recipe. We also need an Elementium. We'll take that, as well as a Pixie Dust, which I believe we did teach. We did indeed. Fantastic. Let's do this and this. And so now we are just missing 1 actual Amethyst Shard, and I think just the charged Amethyst. And once we have that, I'm pretty sure we're going to be good to go. And back over here, this is done. Nice. Okay, so the chat has pointed out that this Amethyst Dust does actually have an EMC value, so I'm wondering, yeah, it looks like we do have to get specifically that kind of Amethyst Dust. Now, you can right-click to take items off here. Unfortunately, they do come back off in the order that you put them on, and we did put the Amethyst Dust on right at the start. So we can go ahead and replace everything else on here, but it looks like we are going to have to get an Amethyst Shard and run it through the crushing wheels down here. Thankfully, that shouldn't be too difficult. If I just kind of try and throw it in there, Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think that's close enough, unfortunately. I do think you can just throw them in, though. Like, I think that will work, and hopefully that amethyst ends up down here somewhere. I'm gonna put this in here. That's just gonna dump it into our interface. Nope, that is not gonna work. Okay, that's fine. Let me temporarily then move this drawer out of the way, and let me drop this just straight into the chute like that. That should add it to the front of the queue, and boom. Nice, we got some amethyst dust. We can then go ahead, shift right click, try not to die inside of the... Oh, okay, yep, nope, that's not what you want to do. You don't want to die inside of the crushing wheels. That is not ideal. We should be able to get back, thankfully, most of our stuff. I'm pretty sure there should be a gravestone up here that we can access. Whereabouts is that? It is here. Okay, if I break that, we do get our stuff back. Fantastic. We are going to have to put things like the backpack back on and the ring back in there, and the remote goes down there. Perfect. Now we should be able to throw this in here and pull out the amethyst dust. Perfect. And let's do this more responsibly. There we go. Perfect. And let's also get rid of this now unnecessary cobblestone. Flipping heck. But that should be everything, chat, for us to do something like this. And so now this is ready to go. It does require mana, of course, to make it happen. And so we're going to take the hot graphite. We're going to drop that in here like this. Also, if you press M and then right click on the death marker, you can remove that beacon in the world, if you're wondering. And from there, we just get a mana spreader. Place that down on, let's say, here. We're going to put all of our mana into this pool, and then using our Wand of the Forest, of course, shift right click and shift right click. That's going to send the mana from this pool over into the runic altar, and you'll see that very faintly on the right hand side there, the Melodium ingot is kind of slowly filling up with a green circle. You know, we're maybe like a 1/10 of the way there currently, and it's going to kind of slowly fill in like a clockwise around that Melodium ingot. Once it's full up, we might actually need a living rock to fulfill the craft. But at that point, we can also get rid of this obituary as well. We'll just throw that into the abyss and pretend it didn't happen. But at that point, we should have our Melodium ingot, and at that point, we can start progressing on to this stellarium ingot. It does require this charged snowball. One thing you can do is you can put water down next to the pure daisy. And by next to the pure daisy, I mean in one of the 8 slots around it, and that will turn the water into snow. So if I put it here, you do have to be careful, because obviously if you don't put stuff down like this, the water will flow. And if you have the pure daisy just planted on the grass, it will also break the pure daisy, which is not ideal. But if we use our Hexel here, which can also act as a shovel, it should hopefully allow us to pick that up. And speaking of which, I will do this as well to make it just that tiny bit faster at transforming the water into snow, because apparently it takes a very long time. But once we have it, we can break it, and I don't think it requires much energy over in the energizing orb to turn that into a charged snowball. It does require 500,000 FE, but thankfully for us, that's not a problem, and it does have an EMC value of 1, so we can get a ton of them. Perfect. Down here, this is almost good to go. And there it is. Cool. So once you see the little icon that says Living Rock +1, you drop down the Living Rock, you right-click with the wand, and you get the Melodium ingot, which unfortunately does not have an EMC value, but we are now, I think, basically ready to go. Let me bookmark this recipe, and then back up here, we'll put in 1 Melodium ingot, we'll put in 1 charged snowball, we'll then grab 1 Signalum, let me pull the rest of this away, along with 1 Prismalum, 1 Enderium, and 1 Gaia ingot. Cool. And we'll throw all of those into here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, that is going to take 5 times longer than the setup before took, which is going to be a real long time. Let me do some quick kind of back of the napkin calculations here. We are producing, let's say 9,000 for the sake of easy mathematics. We need to do 500 million redstone flux in total. Divide that by 9,000 gives us a number of ticks, which is like 55,000 ticks. Divide that by 20 takes us to 2,777 seconds. If we divide that by 60, it's like 46 minutes is how long it's going to take to make that using our current setup, which is not an ungodly amount of time, but it is a very long time. It's probably unnecessarily long. And so I think what we will do, given that it's actually not very difficult for us to do it, is I think I'm going to tear down this reactor, at least a little bit, and just build it back bigger. I'm going to use the same space here. In fact, we might even go kind of the full size of this platform. It really depends on how limited we are on EMC, but I think we'll just take the reactor we currently have, build it bigger, and use that extra power to hopefully make the energizing orb just that little bit faster. All right, so not too long later, and we're almost there on a 9x9x7, so it's 9 wide, 9 deep, and then 7 tall reactor here. Basically set up the same. I have gone ahead and dumped a lot more of our EMCable items into the network to give us enough EMC to do this, and right now we're just going to kind of build up all of these reactor fuel rods. It looks like almost all of them. I guess this back one doesn't connect here, which is kind of why that's not working, but so long as we have enough, everything else here should just build. I want to make sure they all do go down. Let me make sure I've got enough fuel rods in. They are expensive, but I think that should be good to go. Let me put the rest of these back, and then let me fill in the last of this glass. If we built it correctly, it should form. This time around, I did just put everything on the front, so the power tap and the redstone port is also on the front here, and now you'll see that we have nowhere near enough uranium in here. It does save the uranium, so you don't lose any uranium that's in there, which is very nice indeed. You'll see that it's kind of all distributed amongst all of the fuel rods, and of course now we can take a few more stacks of uranium and chuck them into here. Again, for some reason, we do have to do a hopper for this, and we'll also put that pipe back down in just a second, but I do kind of want to, for now at least, manually place these in there because I have a feeling that this EMC link is going to be no longer fast enough to actually pump the items in, right? We'll change that back to output. We'll put you back on here, but this can only put in 1 uranium a second, which with a reactor this big, I think is not going to be quick enough. So for now, we'll speed that up. This can take a ton of uranium. I guess we can speed up even more here. Like way more than we can probably make with the amount of EMC that we have. Yeah, but we can turn it on. And already we're producing almost over quadruple, nearly 5 times as much power as we were a second ago, which is going to bring, of course, that 46 minutes down drastically, which is good. Of course, we do want to make sure that we put our flux plug back on there so that the power can be utilized up on the surface. And speaking of which, if we do actually want to, whoops, I've got to make sure I'm not in flight mode when I use these elevators, but if we do actually want to be able to use that power, we need to put down more of the energizing rods, because here we're limited to just 12,000 redstone flux per tick, because that's the amount that the energizing rods can transfer. Of course, we can put down even more of these fully around that, and if we wanted to, we could even go ahead and put down another flux point. It looks like it does make sense to kind of put the flux point maybe 1 block higher up. For example, if I did something like this and connected that to our network, now we can put a full 6 around this flux point, unlike this one where I've only got space for 5 due to the floor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is potentially too many, but hopefully that's going to make it just that little bit faster at pumping 500 million redstone flux into this orb. And you can see that all of these are a little further away, but they do still connect. I think that one there is connecting. It must be, because this one's also connecting. And so yeah, that's going to get there slowly but surely. How many do we have? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 10 of these down. So we're doing 40,000 redstone flux per tick, which is about the amount that we are producing down over here. Yeah, 44,000. So that is working and should be doing things as fast as it can be. It does look like this one. No, it is working. It is connecting. You can see the number going up and then back down again. So that is definitely connected up. And so yeah, at 40,000 redstone flux per tick, it's going to take about 10 minutes to go from 0 to 100. All right, so not too long later, about 7 or 8 minutes, we have 16 stellarium ingots. Nice. I did go ahead and move this flux point up by 1. I also added the extra energizing rod there. And down here, I did replace down the pipe to connect up the basic EMC link. And so this is now producing even more power, because the more full this is on fuel, the more power it does produce. And we are slowly losing about 4,096 EMC a second because of the fact that uranium is being pumped in. Hopefully we're not too far away here from that uranium being full, at which point it should stop going down. And I'm going to turn this off for now, because I think outside of using the energizing orb, the 35 million RF that we have stored in here should be enough for basically everything that we need. So we now have 16 of the stellarium ingots. We can unbookmark this and unbookmark most of this, because now we just need the osmium. And as we saw right at the start of this episode, to make osmium, all we have to do is take 1 stellarium dust, which we can get by, you guessed it, pulverizing 1 stellarium over in here. We can place that directly into the arc furnace like this, and using the power from that reactor downstairs, that's going to turn that 1 stellarium dust into 3 osmium ingots, which we can of course place directly into our transmutation interface. And now we have the ability to make as much osmium as we can afford, which is fantastic. And using that osmium, I believe that we can do the most important quest in this quest line and get a steel casing, which, you guessed it, also has an EMC value. And so now we have access to over 500 of them. And in doing so, chat, we have unlocked the next chapter of the quest book, the technological revolution right here, which is going to have us start with basic mechanism and move our way through to producing expensive antimatter pellets, which are then, of course, going to unlock the final chapter of the quest book. Before we get started with that, I think in the next episode, we might take a look at doing some kind of EMC generation, because right now we do have EMC and we are kind of pseudo generating that EMC down here. We could start to look at pumping all of this stuff directly into either an EMC link or kind of importing it into the transmutation interface. But we do, of course, have access to things like the Project E power flowers, which do also produce EMC passively, and getting some passive EMC generation would be useful, especially as we start using more EMC links like we're doing down here. Obviously, we have this, which is kind of continually pumping EMC out. And if we have stuff like this that is continuously getting rid of EMC, but we don't have a system in place to generate EMC, then we're going to be in a tricky situation, because eventually we're going to end up with no EMC, which is not ideal. So I think next time we'll come back and we'll look at setting up some kind of EMC generation, which is going to set us up nicely, I think, for the mechanism chapter of this quest book. But as always, that is a problem for future Isaac. For now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Sky Revolutions there.